Hey everybody, welcome to the Rooted Willow Homeschool channel. Today's video is going to be about answering the question, who was Plutarch? So usually when I love a book, there's something about the characters or the plot or the setting or something about the book itself which captures my imagination and draws me into it. But every once in a while, there'll be a book that I'm drawn to for the sake of the book as well as for the sake of the author. So for instance, when I read a work by C.S. Lewis or George MacDonald, I feel like I'm in the company of a friend and a mentor when I read those books. Someone that I would trust my own children with even. And that is the case with Plutarch. And I'm not alone in this. Plutarch is one of the most beloved writers in the canon of world literature. And I think the reason for this is that when you read Plutarch, you get the sense that he is always trying to improve himself, to make himself into a better, more virtuous person, and that he's interested in helping his readers become a better person as well. Now, the interesting thing about Plutarch, the ironic thing, is that although he's famous for writing biographies, we know very little about his own biography. We do know some things. We know, for instance, that he was born in 45 AD in Chaeronea, which is a small town in Greece. And we know that as a young man, he went to Athens to study philosophy, and he excelled in philosophy. He made a name for himself doing this, and he had his own school of philosophy back in his hometown in Chaeronea, which he led. In fact, it was his skill in philosophy that got him attention in Rome. The people of Rome invited him to come to Rome to give a series of lectures on philosophical topics. And he did this. And apparently it was a very enjoyable experience. And while he was there in Rome, he toured the countryside of Italy and gathered a lot of the information that he later used in writing his famous Lives of Noble Greeks and Romans. So that's kind of interesting. He also traveled to Alexandria, Egypt, which for the ancient world was the center of intellectual life. And the Greeks also had a kind of a fascination with the ancient Egyptians because of their accomplishments and their wisdom. So I'm sure that was another very fulfilling trip for a man like Plutarch. But the interesting thing about Plutarch is that he, although there was this lure of celebrity and fame, he didn't really ever take the bait. You know, he spent his life, for the most part, in Chaeronea, living a life that was devoted to family and the local civic duties that were, a part of life in Chaeronea, and his school. He does not seem to have been to follow the potential to become a celebrity or to become wealthy or famous. And I think this is because, although he's a great storyteller, as you'll see when you read his lives, as a storyteller he really loved these stories of adventures of these great, remarkable people who accomplished big things and changed the course of history. And I mean, who doesn't? Those are really cool stories to read and to tell. But the philosopher in him understood that you don't need to do big epic things like that. You don't need to wage big battles. You don't need to conquer great land, wide swaths of land, or to do these huge epic things in order to be a noble person. A noble person is someone whose life is crowned by love and reason and self-control, and a person who lives like this is noble in the true sense of the word, in a way that a famous king isn't if he doesn't practice virtues like that. And Plutarch seems to have lived his life doing his best to practice virtues like this. Now, in this series, we're going to be going through this series. I hope you'll join me. We're going to be looking at the different lives of Plutarch. the lives that he wrote. The work as a whole is usually referred to as the lives of the noble Greeks and Romans. Sometimes it's just called Lives, Plutarch's Lives. Plutarch himself called it Parallel Lives because he had the original organizing idea he had for it was to present these lives to his readers in pairs. And the pairs were selected based on similarity of personality or circumstance or something like that. So, for instance, he would pair up Theseus, the founder hero of Athens, with Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome. So one Greek, one Roman who had similar challenges, accomplished similar things. And his purpose in doing this, at the end of these, when you present something as a pair like this, it naturally invites comparison. And he does this at the end of some of these lives. He compares the two lives that he presented as a pair. And his purpose in comparing them is to present us with, to consider who led the more virtuous life, who acted better in different situations. And I think this gives us some insight into the true purpose behind these lives that Plutarch wrote. So they are, of course, a rich source of historical information. Historians use Plutarch's lives to learn about what happened in the ancient world of the Greeks and the Romans. But that isn't primarily why Plutarch wrote these biographies. He makes a very clear distinction between what he calls biography and what he calls history. And he says it better than I can, so I'm just going to read a quote of his. This quote comes from the beginning of his life of Alexander the Great. And here he makes a distinction between what he has in mind when he says history and what he has in mind when he says biography. So here's the quote. He writes, he says, "I am writing biography, not history, and often a man's most brilliant actions prove nothing as to his true character, while some trifling incident, some casual remark or jest, will throw more light upon what manner of man he was than the bloodiest battle, the greatest array of armies, or the most important siege. Therefore, just as portrait painters pay most attention to those peculiarities of the face and eyes in which the likeness consists, and care but little for the rest of the figure, so it is my duty to dwell especially upon those actions which reveal the workings of my heroes' minds, and from these to construct the portraits of their respective lives, leaving their battles and their great deeds to be recorded by others." So, the essential purpose of history is to record these big events, the events that change the way governments are set up, or the reoriented borders of countries and set one person on a throne or took another person off the throne. That's history. To record those big events for the sake of having the record. But biographies, according to Plutarch, that he's writing, he writes them to tell us about the people who were behind these big events. What made them tick? What virtues did they have that we could emulate? That's his real purpose in writing these things. And here's another quote that I think puts it in a good context, the way he thought about it. This one is from the beginning of the life of Timoleon, which is another life later on. He says, "It was for the sake of others that I first started to write biographies, but I soon began to dwell upon and delight in them for myself, endeavoring to the best of my ability to regulate my own life by them and to mirror the virtues I saw in these great people. By the study of their biographies, we receive each person as a guest into our minds, and so train ourselves by constantly dwelling upon the memorials of the great and the good. That should anything base or vicious be placed in our way by the society into which we are necessarily thrown, we reject it and expel it from our thoughts by fixing them calmly and happily on what is noble." Now, this perfectly describes my experience of reading Plutarch, and I hope it will describe your experience as we go through Plutarch. When I read these, I feel like I'm right there with the people, going through their adventures and experiencing what they're experiencing. And when I see them do these admirable things, the things that they do which are admirable, obviously everybody's life has good things and bad things. But these people stand out in the fact that sometimes, often, their courage is well beyond what we observe normally in people, or their self-restraint, or their patience, or their kindness. And so when I read about these people and the things they're doing, I agree with Plutarch that not only am I having the adventure, but I am fixing my thoughts calmly and happily on what is noble. And I'll finish with this. Whenever I read these lives, no matter whose life I'm reading, I do find myself inspired by one life in particular. It's not a life that you'll find in the collection as such, but it's a life who gave the work as a whole its beauty and its spirit, and that's the life of its author, Plutarch. Whenever I read these different lives, I feel, as I said, like I'm in the company of a friend and a mentor, someone who is speaking to me over the centuries to try to teach me how to be a better person by these different examples. And I hope this will be your experience. I hope you will join me as we go through these different lives. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.